good evening, everybody. Welcome to JCU's Bebigu Yumba campus, and to those of us joining online this evening for our annual Rick Speare Oration. I am Associate Professor David Simcock. I'm the Dean of the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences. At least I'm acting in that role now. And it's my privilege to introduce our speakers tonight. Before we get underway, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to go through. So for those of us joining in person tonight, in the event of an emergency, please follow the directions of JCU staff to the exit of the building and meet in the grassed area outside the building, if safe to do so. The bathrooms in the facility are out our doors and to the right, and I'm advised also they're automatic doors, so please make sure you lock them if you use them. And finally, if there's a first aid incident, then please notify a member of staff. I've also just been told that we're not technically supposed to drink in here, so if you have a glass of alcohol, please consume it quietly. For our online participants, could you please turn your camera off until we get to the question and answer session at the end of the event if you have a question. Otherwise, your face will be on the big screen and we'll see every time you move. Please also ensure your microphone is on mute until we get to the question and answer session, and please also be aware, everybody, this session is being recorded. Having gone through the formalities, I'd like to introduce Professor Gracelyn Smallwood, Australian Medal, to deliver the welcome to country. Now, Gracelyn says she did her Masters and PhD here at JCU. She's been associated with JCU for around about 50 years. Started off as a midwife before she actually had Professor Rick Speare as her supervisor for her Masters and PhD. So she says it's particularly fitting that she's doing the welcome for us. And another fond memory, she tells me, is assisted by Rick and his wife, Kerry. They helped set up the Townsville Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Health Service here 50 years ago. So a particularly proud moment. I'll stop now and hand over to Gracelyn. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and Botamuli to everybody here tonight and the ones online. I'm just looking for Kerry. Put your hand up, okay. Thank you. And Botamuli, for those young students, I'm well known by the lecturers. Means greetings and farewell in our Birragubba language to that excited that this university is now named Bebigu Yumba, which means place of learning. And I'm a bit old now with our chairman telling me that, telling you that story, but I was just reminiscing that every year I come here to do Rick's welcome. I think the trauma is going to leave me. But it doesn't, of losing one of the most amazing men in my life and his beautiful wife, Kerry, as well as when I go to do my beautiful friend, the late Maggie Brandt, Professor Ronsky's beautiful wife, and had so much support out here. Now retired after 55 years of nursing midwifery and outlived my life expectancy. And 73, and in First Nations Australians die about 63. So someone said, you have to follow Professor Smallwood around to see her lifestyle. And I said, no, I don't think that'd be a good idea. But to the Vice-Chancellor, if he's here, I'd like to say hi. And Richard Murray, one of my great supporters, and also Professor Ian Ronsky, one of my professors, but family. I worked with Professor Ronsky many years ago in Western Australia. But unfortunately, the time clock ticks away and we're getting old. My children tell me I'm getting younger every year, so that's a wonderful compliment. But James Cook is very close to me, and I just hope that the students, I travel the world, and when I hear there's a student there from James Cook, I let them know the whole history. And my history is 100,000 years old. And truth-telling and students knowing what really happened in this country, you need to know what happened. The referendum was a disaster, but it hasn't left us in deep mourning. It's opened a can of worms for truth-telling. You'll be a wonderful student if you know the real truth of this country, and I believe in reconciliation with the truth. Thank you for giving me 5 minutes to talk about 200 years. And as I said, Rick and Kerry were really close to my family, especially my mother. And Kerry's here tonight. And it doesn't get better. Every year I come to do a welcome for Maggie Grant, a beautiful friend, and Rick Speare. God bless you all. And I don't want to take my knowledge to the grave. So keep inviting me out here to the School of Public Health. Watamuli.
Thank you for that welcome, Gracelyn. And I'd like to just reiterate that it was actually during the 50th anniversary celebrations of JCU in 2020 that the Bundall people generously gifted JCU Townsville the campus name of Bebegu Yamba, meaning place of learning, in the Biriguba language. So I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and also those of the neighbouring Wulgarukaba people. I extend our respect from JCU's distinguished Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, graduates and staff. We have many distinguished guests here tonight, and staff and students are joining us for the Rick Speare Oration. And this includes, I believe, students of the postgraduate veterinary program established by Professor Rod Campbell in 1969. I especially wish to welcome Professor Speare's wife, Dr. Kerry Kelly, and her children, who are able to be with us tonight. Emeritus Professor Rick Speare, Australian Medal, joined James Cook University in 1988 and was a director of the JCU School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine from 2009 to 2012. He also taught and helped many, many students in the Masters of Public Health and Tropical Medicine program. Professor Speare retired from James Cook University in 2012 and was made a member of the Order of Australia in the same year and remained an active emeritus professor, continuing to teach, research, and be a mentor for his students. It was actually during his travel to the Cairns campus of James Cook University to teach on the 5th of June 2016 that Professor Speare was involved in a car accident in which he tragically passed away. Professor Speare was a dear friend, a very valued and respected colleague of many, and his loss is still felt deeply across the university, as you've just heard, from staff and students alike. As a professional, as a veterinarian and a medical doctor, he was passionate in his advocacy for improving health in the tropics. He is undertaking research to generate evidence for decisions and for building research capacity in local researchers. He is best renowned for his research on amphibian diseases, parasitic nematode worms, lyssavirus, and of course, head lice. In recognition of his work in the international veterinary sciences sphere, Professor Speare was posthumously awarded the Kesteven Medal by the Australian Veterinary Association, recognising, and I quote, distinguished contributions to international veterinary science in the fields of technical and scientific assistance to developing countries. In addition, the Australian College of Tropical Medicine Prize was renamed the Rick Speare Medal in 2018. The medal is awarded to the graduating student and the Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine who demonstrates the best overall performance. Professor Speare built and established a research profile for the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences, particularly in One Health. One Health as a concept is an integrated, unified approach to balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and the environment. It is in recognition of the significant contribution of Professor Speare to this field of research that the college introduced a perpetual series of research seminars open to the public and to the university community, with a focus on One Health research. Each oration features an external speaker who has renown for their research and teaching in One Health. Our speaker tonight is someone who is well known and respected in the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences, and that's Professor Maxine Whittaker. She was formerly also a Dean of the College of Public Health, Medical and Veterinary Sciences, and actually appointed me to be an Associate Dean of Learning and Teaching in the college in 2019. So she started me on my career trajectory and, shall we say, teaching, mentoring, and I would say administrative roles. Back to Professor Whittaker. She's a public health physician and applied medical anthropologist. And she studies researches in health systems and teaches as a research academic in these fields. She's a public health leader in One Health and is a director of the World Health Collaborating Organization, Collaborating Center for Vector-Borne and Neglected Tropical Diseases. She works with civil society platform for health equity and inclusiveness in the Greater Mekong Subregion and supports strategic planning, gender equality, disability and social inclusion for mosquito-borne diseases in the Pacific. Professor Whittaker also holds several roles in advisory boards and steering groups, and in particular, she's a member of the One Health high-level expert panel, which is the scientific and strategic advisory group to a quadripartite group of organizations. That is the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the United Nations Environment Programme, the World Health Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health in their collaboration to create the One Health initiatives. In addition, Professor Whittaker holds roles on partnerships for a Healthy Region technical reference group in Australia and the Biosecurity Ministerial Advisory Committee in Queensland. She's the chair of Reaching the Unreached Technical Working Group, a senior editor on the CABI One Health Journal, independent reference group member for the Asia Pacific Observatory on Independent Reference on Health Systems and Policies, and is a co-author and editor of a book titled One Health, The Added Value of Integrated Health Approaches. Since 2010, Professor Whittaker has been a principal investigator and co-investigator on several national and international competitive research grants. She has lived, worked, and breathed in global health for more than 35 years, and a career which has spanned across countries in Africa, Asia, and Oceania. In 2017, she was awarded the Royal Australasian College of Physicians International Medal in recognition of outstanding service in developing countries. So I'm very pleased to invite Professor Maxine Whittaker to the lectern to deliver tonight's Rick Speare Oration.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, Auntie Grace, for that lovely welcome. It's such an honour to be here, excuse me, today, presenting the Rick Speare Oration. I remember Rick in Solomon Islands, saw him in the Ministry of Health car park, and he was there with David McLaren, also of JCU, talking with people at the ministry about community-led initiatives for health in Malaita province. One of his legacies is that this work continues today and includes One Health in the full definition of it, as I'll explore today. He was a trailblazer in many of his activities, as you heard, including in One Health. It was noted in one eulogy on Rick, and I quote, "He is a much loved and devoted family man." Emeritus Professor Rick Speare was also highly awarded and an internationally respected researcher and educator who impacted the lives of a great number of people. Rick was, as you heard, a medical practitioner, a veterinary surgeon, public health physician, a great friend, colleague, supervisor, mentor, role model, and an inspiring teacher to many. David stole a part of this quote by talking about the work he did, so I won't repeat that, although it is significant work globally, particularly the work with chytrid mycosis, because that's really making a big difference and still is talked about around the world in many of the things that I read. The end of the quote said, one of his great passions was to understand and improve the life of people and animals in the Pacific. What a wonderful legacy he left behind with his untimely passing. I wish to acknowledge the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples as the original inhabitants and traditional custodians of this continent, and that they have a unique cultural and spiritual relationship to the land and to the waters. The traditional custodians of this land, as you heard from David, are the Bindal people. They've been living on this land where the Bebegu Yamba campus resides for thousands of generations, and I pay respect to their culture, their elders, past, present, emerging. I also acknowledge and pay respect to their direct neighbours, the north here, the Wulgurukapa people. And I acknowledge any Indigenous people here today, online or in the room. You see behind me one of the significant pieces of artwork. This is by Brian Robinson, and JCU gave me permission to use it here today. This print I'm using because it reflects on One Health and sustainability themes of this oration, but also the depth of Indigenous knowledge and experience on these topics that must be included in design, implementation, and evaluation of any sustainability approaches. Brian said of his work, quote, "Creation ancestors form part of a living landscape, and practices such as hunting and foraging have an important place in contemporary Indigenous life. There remains a strong belief in the land as sentient and that ancestral spirits imbue the landscape, creating a situation in which spiritual and physical aspects cannot be altogether separated." He said this intertwined connection allows the intellectual and creative spirit embodied within Indigenous peoples to manifest to material objects that they create. He's finished. This relationship with the land through its direct physical qualities and a mythological sense of place and time are transformed through the body and onto objects of art. This is a deep relationship, and a reliance on country to establish identity and belonging is paramount. End of quote. So briefly today, I'm going to although again you've heard it, but I'll reiterate it, a definition of One Health and an introduction to the sustainability goals, and then use some case studies to illustrate the application of One Health approach to many of these sustainable development goals. So let's describe these two frameworks, One Health and Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals, a big mouthful, also known as the Global Goals or SDGs, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people by 2030 enjoy peace and prosperity. Probably got a bit of work to do on some of those. There are 5 principles in this 2030 agenda for sustainable development. The resolution says that the overarching outcomes, which the 17 goals that you see there on the those lovely coloured boxes, that this is what they're contributing towards. And I'll quote, "People, we are determined to end poverty and hunger in all their forms and dimensions, and to ensure that all human beings can fulfil their potential in dignity and equality and in a healthy environment. Planet, we are determined to protect the planet from degradation, including through sustainable consumption and production, sustainably manage its natural resources, and take urgent action on climate change so that it can support the needs of the present and future generations. Prosperity. We are determined to ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilling lives, and that economic, social, technological progress occurs in harmony with nature. Peace. We are determined to foster peaceful, just, and inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. There can be no sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. Partnership. We are determined, and these we's are everybody who signed, every country in the world is saying we here. We are determined to mobilise the means required to implement this agenda through a revitalised global partnership for sustainable development. End quote. So the interlinkages and integrated nature of these 17 goals are of crucial importance to ensure the purpose of that agenda is realised. If we realise these ambitions across the full extent of the agenda, then it will profoundly improve our lives and the world. So the other half of that slide, One Health. One Health was defined by this One Health high-level expert panel in 2021 as an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimise the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. The panel's definitions also accompanied by fundamental principles to help ensure that One Health actions are effective, fair, equitable, and sustainable. Some of these are equity between sectors and between disciplines, socio-political and multicultural parity. That's a mouthful, but basically all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities, and inclusion and engagement of communities and marginalised people. Socio-ecological equilibrium that seeks a harmonious balance between human, animal, and environment in their interactions, and acknowledging the importance of biodiversity, access to sufficient natural space and resources, and the intrinsic value of all living things within the ecosystem. Stewardship and the responsibility of humans to change their behaviours and adopt sustainable solutions that recognise the importance of animal welfare and understand the co-benefits, co-efficiency, risks, trade-offs and opportunities for equitable and holistic solutions. And transdisciplinarity. I should ask some of the students of the block course, what do I mean by transdisciplinarity? I'll help you out today though. Transdisciplinarity and multi-sectoral collaboration, meaning basically to include all relevant disciplines, both modern and traditional forms of knowledge, and a broad representative array of perspectives. It refers to an adaptive and problem-focused approach that involves collaboration between different stakeholders and rights holders to address complex and social ecological problems. So you'll see that there, what I've added to the One Health panels diagram, which is the really fancy looking 3, is the Indigenous knowledge symbol. Because they left that out, although it's in the definition, their graphics don't show that. And I think that's a big problem. I am going to raise it when we meet in Cape Town in a few weeks' time. So I'm going to have some case studies to explore some of these, taken individually, but you will also see the intersections, because none of these things, as the definition of Sustainable Development Goals said, stand alone. And these are actually real life examples of One Health approaches, because often people think One Health is a lovely theoretical framework or just works in research, but these are real life examples, many of these, not all of them mine, but often of colleagues, to show that it can work. So the first, SDG 1, no poverty. And the title of this was to end poverty in all of its forms, everywhere. The case study explores how the Food and Agricultural Organisation has identified the use of a One Health approach to address issues of wildlife management in Asia Pacific, whilst addressing animal and human health, the maintenance of biodiversity, and respecting Indigenous peoples' rights to these lands and their traditional knowledge as equal partners. It noted that in Asia and Pacific, that rich biodiversity and those associated ecosystem services are vital for human well-being and for sustainable development. Just a couple of facts for you to contemplate before I get into the case. Biodiversity in the region, in any region, is essential for food, water, energy, health security, income generation, recreation, education, cultural and spiritual fulfillment. And in this region, it does so for 4.5 billion people. Many of those are rural communities and Indigenous peoples. Equally important, the region's wildlife plays a fundamental role in ecological processes, including maintaining ecosystem services, ecosystem health, thereby making it an essential contribution to a healthy planet. An estimated 60,000 plant species that are used globally originate from the Asia-Pacific region, and 26,000 of these actually have well-documented medicinal or related uses like cosmetics, aromatherapy, food and drink. Second fact, in 2023, the World Bank estimated that almost 350 million Indigenous peoples live in Asia and Pacific. That's 70% of the Indigenous people worldwide. And 73% of these people live in rural areas. Unfortunately, the socioeconomic and demographic situations of many of these populations, including those in forested landscapes in the region, are characterized by extreme poverty and a rise in migration to urban areas, particularly of the younger generation. 12 of these forest sites in Asia-Pacific wild species contribute 20% of household income. They rely on wildlife for their income. As much as 80% of the forest biodiversity in this region lies within Indigenous peoples' lands, and 22% of the forest carbon is found in the 52 tropical and subtropical countries stewarded by rural communities, with 1/3 of those in areas where Indigenous people lack formal recognition of their tenure rights. But as was in that definition, these communities hold a wealth of traditional knowledge on zoonotic diseases, agri-food systems, sustainable use of those systems, conservation and restoration of wildlife. They have deep connections to their territories and their biodiversity, have developed profound knowledge on seasonal and ecological cycles, and have learnt to gather food, medicine, energy and shelter through agriculture, agroforestry, fisheries, livestock husbandry. Moreover, these territories and ecosystems are a central part of their cosmovision, their identity and their culture. These forest resources provide a critical safety net for such communities during natural disasters, economic downturns, periods of unrest, commodity food crises and pandemics. Indeed, in the Greater Mekong, where I do a lot of my work, and that's one of my colleagues there online, we saw a lot of this. We saw a lot more people relying upon the forest to survive during COVID-19. Recent findings also show that populations of many wild mammals and birds have declined across this region. Habitat degradation, fragmentation, especially in forests, wetlands and grasslands, have primarily resulted in declining wild mammal and bird populations. Added to that is illegal trade in wildlife and in wildlife products, causing species to decline in some countries. And there's an increased frequency of human and wildlife conflict because of all of these pressures. This ecosystem fragmentation, the livestock needing to encroach on these wildlife habitats. Indeed, FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, currently ranks this human-wildlife conflict as amongst one of the major threats to the survival of many endangered species, as well as for the security and well-being of many of these communities. In the context of human health, these interfaces between animals, humans, and the environment are critical. About 60% of all emerging human infectious diseases have zoonotic origin, come from animals. In other words, they were there in the animals and now have been transmitted to humans. Of the recent zoonotic emerging infectious disease events that we've had, almost 3/4 of these were caused by pathogens, by microbes that originated in the wildlife. Wild meat of many of these species is an important and traditional source of protein, fat, and micronutrients for millions of Indigenous peoples and rural communities, particularly in our tropical and subtropical regions. But various unsanitary practices in that human-animal interface, farms, holding areas, transport, markets, slaughter, and butchery places, may contribute to increased risks for these emerging infectious diseases. And also that intensified contact in that unregulated trade in wildlife, especially in urban areas, increases that risk of zoonotic disease transmission. So the story, in 2023 to 2024, the Food and Agricultural Organization brought together a transdisciplinary team to understand and engage in how to address the rights of Indigenous people and remote communities and wildlife and ecosystem conservation, whilst also addressing poverty, zoonotic infections and pandemics, just a small ask. Of zoonotic spillovers and future pandemics. To regulate, manage, and monitor the harvesting, trade, and use of wildlife to ensure that it is safe, sustainable, and legal, but also to understand that wildlife persecution, including the killing of wild animals suspected of transmitting diseases, will not address the causes of the emergence or spread of these zoonoses. So this story I'm using to show that complexity of some of the issues like the reduction of poverty, SDG 1, whilst trying to also use that One Health approach, considering animal, in this case wildlife, plant health, biodiversity, and human health. And these sustainable wildlife management principles are guiding the work now in many countries. Oops.
Yeah, I just realised. Sorry.
The next one, zero hunger, number 2. And it states to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So, did you know that soil is the home to the greatest biodiversity of the planet? It's estimated that 1 acre or 0.4 of a hectare, approximately, of soil, just of soil, contains 408 kilograms of earthworms, 1,088 kilograms of fungi, 680 kilograms of bacteria, 60 kilograms of other microorganisms, and I forgot to, 400 kilograms of arthropods like millipedes, spiders, centipedes, and even sometimes some small mammals. 1 gram of soil may hold 1 billion bacteria, in which only 5% of those bacteria have we even discovered. Diverse populations of living organisms are vital for effective nutrient cycling within soil. Healthy soil is dynamic and needs to have a huge reservoir of biodiversity. But climate, environmental changes, land use and land use management, human behaviours, in air, water, microbes, animals, chemicals, minerals, all affect healthy soil. In optimum conditions, you can make a centimetre of topsoil in about 200 to 400 years. In the tropics around here, it's going to take you maybe 200 years, a bit easier. But we quickly lose that topsoil in a year. And without soil, there's no food. Yet each year, 24 billion tonnes of fertile soil are lost to erosion alone. 3.4 tonnes each year for every person on this planet. Soil health is a critical component of the One Health approach for plant, animal, and human health and well-being. The effects of the health of soil upon human and animal health and the effects of human and animal activities upon soil health have actually been under-addressed in the discussions of One Health. A transdisciplinary approach, this time also including soil scientists, agronomists, along with a lot of the other people that you often think of in a One Health approach, is absolutely required. And we argued this in an article last year in Nature. The soil provides important ecosystem services to maintain the quality of water, air, atmosphere, vegetation, and microbes. These in turn affect what we call those provisioning and regulating, so the food and fuel and the regulation of greenhouses and microbes that soil produces for plants, animals, and human health, as well as the cultural services of healing and recreation. Soils actually store more than 4,000 billion tonnes of carbon, compared to forests, which is about 360 billion, and in the atmosphere, there's about 800 billion tonnes in the form of carbon dioxide. So you can see disrupting these balances has got major impacts on lots of things. For example, soil organic matter, if oxidized, can contribute to greenhouse gases. Particularly, that's dependent upon land management practices and global warming. Synthetic chemicals residing in soils can be detected in fresh and marine environments, even thousands of kilometres away from the source of production. This causes hazardous concentrations of toxic substances in the soil, and they're also in the water life and land life. And it biomagnifies, so every layer up in the food chain, it gets more and more concentrated and more toxic. Soil also has microbiomes. Did you know that? Now, a couple of people in the room here do research on microbiomes, but soil has its microbiome too. And this is beneficial, including the mycorrhiza. I was talking to some people about fungi today, but that's basically that working relationship between plant roots and funguses. And these provide nutrients and protection against diseases and disease-causing microorganisms. Grazing herbivores are exposed to those soil microbiomes through their direct ingestion or consumption of plant microbiomes, and that provides the microbial source for the gut microbiome of the animals, etc., etc. Plant litter, waste, and other detritus return those microorganisms back to the soils, and so you have the microbial loop. But disrupt that loop, and you will alter host and environment-related microbiomes, and that will be associated with disease in many parts of the food chain, including in us. Increasing the diversity of soil in its microbiome can potentially reduce the proliferation and spread of these pathogens to humans, animals, and plants. The effect of soil on human, and less so described, on animal health can really be categorized into a range of things. It can be direct and indirect. It can be through ingestion. It can be through inhalation, dermal absorption, and the components of the soil and the effects of food eaten as a primary source or through the food chain. These effects may be beneficial or detrimental. For animal and human activities like farming, mining, natural disasters like floods can change also all of these effects. Just a few examples. Ingestion. Deliberate ingestion, there are many cultures where geophagy, or also pica, eating soil, is a cultural preference. Where I lived in Zimbabwe and Zambia, some language group, their pregnant women would eat soil for their health during pregnancy. But excessive amounts ingested can cause health problems physically, like obstructed bowel, as you could imagine, constipation, and dysfunctional labour. Unfortunately, not what they were hoping for by eating it. The mineral nutrients that are ingested with soil may actually, if they're in reasonable amounts, have health benefits. The level of many of these minerals, though, is affected by normal weathering, like lead and fluoride. Lead in high levels, we know, causes intellectual and behavioural developmental problems in children. And when I worked in Ningxia province in northwest China, there was high fluoride levels in the water of the people who were there. People's teeth just broke up because it replaces the calcium. And we met women whose pelvises were so deformed because it was fluoride, not calcium, that they had never had a live childbirth. So these things can be useful, but can also be detrimental. There's also worms in the soil. And ingestion of many of these can cause, like large roundworms, whipworms, can cause many health problems. Rick looked a lot at those things. Animals in the environment, for example, dogs and cats, can also contaminate the soil through their feces. I'm sure Sophie does it, who's a lovely dog in the room, and cause roundworm infections, which can lead to organ and eye disease, particularly in young children, when they accidentally eat the soil. But also you can ingest soil on your food. So similar issues of those contaminations, chemical or biological, can occur that way, as well as through fertilizers and pesticides that may be on that food. Dust. Dust from soils can be inhaled by both animals and humans, and this dust may contain minerals and living organisms. They're present in the environment, and they may become dispersed because of human behaviour. Again, things like cultivation, mining, quarrying, construction, and can lead to serious human effects like lung fibrosis and cancers like asbestosis. Erosion of soil through natural events or through human activities like poorly planned irrigation and desiccation exacerbates these issues. You can absorb physical things like dioxins, pesticides, and living organisms, microbes, from the soil through your skin. In 2019, in the flood events in Townsville, we saw spikes in melioidosis. Again, we've got people researching that here. It's one of these problems that caused fatalities not only in humans, but also in animals. Tetanus, well known, and potentially a deadly worldwide infectious disease caused by people who come in contact with soil and don't have immunity. Gardeners, archaeologists, newborn babies and pregnant women who are delivered on the ground or have their umbilical cord cut and covered with contaminated materials are some of the many people at risk. Antibiotics added to livestock feed can enter the soil and the groundwater, and antibiotic-resistant microorganisms have been detected in these sources. Soils do contain elements that are required for plant health, animal and human nutrition, but it's that balance that's important. It's very fragile, and some of these can get to toxic levels quite easily. Things like the pH, the acidity or the alkalinity of the soil, drainage and other factors affect the bioavailability of these elements, and that can be affected also by land use changes and climate change. Are there any tea drinkers here? Tea drinkers, put your hand up. There you go. A quick plug for tea drinkers. Microbes on plant roots affect the flavour and nutritional content of your tea by affecting the nitrogen uptake through the roots. That increases theanine production. That goes into the leaves and that gives you that lovely, rich, umami flavour that you enjoy in your tea, as well as increases that antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties, but also by doing that, by bringing up that nitrogen, you don't need as much fertiliser in the soils. So thank you, tea drinkers. Keep going. Polyethylene and biodegradable plastics are also now, as you could imagine, being found to be in the soils, but they actually significantly reduce nitrogen content in soil, as well as many of these other key nutrients I've alluded to, and that microbial biodiversity. And just recently I've read that those biodegradable plastics, which we thought were going to be a solution, are actually even worse at reducing nitrogen content and biome than the polyethylene plastics. You need that nitrogen in the soil because that develops the chlorophyll. That's the stuff that makes plants green, and that's how they absorb their energy and grow. So I hope what I was trying to show you that soil health is intricately linked to trying to deal with food security and reach that goal. In sub-Saharan Africa, where we know the population will double by 2050, already an estimated 65% of the soils are degraded. Poor harvests, malnutrition, chronic hunger for millions. If we want to reduce global hunger, we need a healthy soil. And this needs One Health thinking. As I said, we've made that point in a recent article. Whoops, that's not, we've gone off set, I think. Excuse me 1 minute. That's a preview, something's gone wrong here. Did you see that one? Yeah. No? Have a quick look, that's what I was just talking about. We had a problem with the sequence when he came back on. I talked you through all of that. So, SDG 10, reduce inequality within and among countries. So just to set the scene, mobility and the dispersion of mobile livestock owners in several countries, including in African countries, leads to difficulties for them to access any services, human or animal health or social services. These inequalities undermine country global efforts to reduce inequalities and to leave no one behind. There's an estimated 268 million pastoralists, probably underestimated because they're mobile, not well counted, but 268 million pastoralists in Africa who inhabit about 40% of the planet's landmass. Pastoralism is an adaptive livestock strategy that's characterized by high reliance on livestock and migration of people and animals to seasonally access grazing lands and water during times of scarcity. This approach does allow pastoralists to make sustainable use of resources in arid environments that otherwise are unsuitable for sedentary agriculture. However, this often means that these pastoralists live in remote parts of Africa where there is low service provision and high vulnerability to disease of animals and humans, and climate-related disasters like drought and flooding, food insecurity, and conflict. As such, they have limited access, as I said before, to social services, animal and human health services. Two examples I wish to explore here to consider how some of these inequalities can be addressed through sharing resources between animal and human health services. In Chad, 40% of the rural population in Chad live greater than 15 kilometres from the nearest health facility. They rarely get access to services, even outreach vaccination services. There's an underestimate, though, of how much access there is. As I said, these people are mobile and often not in the demographic data. In 2000, the prevalence of fully immunised nomadic children and women amongst the Chari, Bagurima, and the Kamanawa people was 0. No child had been immunised. However, in the livestock, because livestock have to be compulsorily vaccinated by mobile veterinary teams, that's because it's a central tool for the control and elimination of contagious livestock diseases like foot and mouth disease, anthrax, and rinderpest. And that government requirement for compulsory vaccination was because the government needed to export livestock. So a decision was made to trial combining animal and human vaccination services because they found that the women and children actually travel with their men who care for their animals as a family unit. There was negotiations with health and livestock authorities and communities to lead to joint preventative health services of communities previously underserved. They were sharing transport logistics and equipment between human and animal health services. In the intervention area, in the first year, they got 10% of the children immunised. And more children and more women were vaccinated in one day where they had these joint rounds than they had otherwise. This was statistically significant, but they also found that pastoralists highly valued these combined services, and they actually got more acceptance of animal health and human health services because of this combination. The sharing of resources also reduced the cost of providing human vaccination by up to 15% per fully immunised child and per pregnant woman receiving her 2 doses of tetanus vaccination. And now parts of Chad, Nigeria, and Mali have scaled this up. In Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, a program called the One Health for Humans, Environments, Animals and Livelihood Project, HEAL. They always have such great names. I can never get my acronyms to work. But the HEAL project has developed an integrated service delivery model called One Health Units, which promote collaborative and cooperation between service providers in human health, animal health, environmental health, and natural resource management. They work as a multi-sectoral team, and these One Health units deliver a range of sector-specific preventive and curative services, as well as cross-cutting services to these vulnerable pastoralists, their livestock, and the rangeland ecosystems that they depend upon. The design, the planning, the management of these One Health activities are led by the communities through a multi-stakeholder innovation platform and through the local government One Health Task Force. These One Health units serve as a collaboration and coordination platform for frontline service providers and community-based actors, and is the primary means by which services are planned and delivered. This unit can be mobile, static, or both. In mobile, frontline service providers move along the pastoralist and livestock routes according to their monthly schedules, changing sites every day and responding to the needs of those different herding communities. In static One Health unit, the service providers work side by side in a shared facility, human and animal health post, water point, other village gathering sites. They're generally staffed by government employees from human health, animal health, environmental health, community mobilisers and community representatives who are supported to deliver these integrated services through the unit as part of their regular duties. There's a governance process that involves all of these stakeholders, and the services they provide are animal health, like disease surveillance, disease vaccination, treatment, animal husbandry and animal products, human health, antenatal care, postnatal care, family planning, growth monitoring, nutrition screening, and primary healthcare consultations, and for rangeland or ecosystem health, grazing management and rangeland restoration. There are also cross-cutting services in environmental health like water, sanitation and hygiene, waste management, plastic removals, and capacity building for the communities and awareness around these issues, but also gender integration and outbreak responses. Sustainability is a key consideration through social equity, environmental protection, and economic viability. And social equity is championed through the implementation of user-defined services shaped by the community and the government. There has been impact. In the first 3 years, 27 of these multi-stakeholder innovation platforms have been developed, 16 One Health units have been established. There's been human health and health education to more than 60,000 people, antenatal care to 7,600 women, 33,000 people immunised, including during the pandemic for COVID-19, a way they could reach these populations, and 84,000 people received healthcare. 1.1 million animals from 78,000 households have been vaccinated, and other animals, about 400,000, have been treated. 7 rangeland management plans have been developed, and 48 hectares of rangeland is now under intensive restoration, and 480 community members have been trained in rangeland management. And there are now 775 safe latrines that have been constructed. So these outcomes occurred even though those first 3 years were during an unprecedented drought in the Horn of Africa and COVID-19. Client satisfaction surveys have actually revealed a high level, the article says, of contentment, with 100% of the service users expressing satisfaction and most people saying that this is the nearest service provision site to their residents. Phase 2 is underway, and there's catalytic funding for 12 years to actually get this up and integrated and sustainable within these populations. So this shows how inequalities in access for these mobile and remote populations can be redressed by combining resources as well as having environmental outcomes. How's time? Climate action. SDG 13. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Healthy Parks, Healthy People is a global movement which is helping communities around the world to realise the health and well-being benefits of spending time in park and in nature. The aim is twofold: to unlock the power of nature and parks through their preventative and restorative health and well-being benefits, but also to conserve biodiversity. Growing scientific evidence and generations of traditional knowledge show that spending time in nature is actually good for our mind, our body, our soul, heals our telomeres. Healthy parks sustain our life and our livability. They nurture healthy ecosystems, provide, as I mentioned earlier, many of those essential services that we rely upon: clean water, climate regulation, clean air. Parks and nature also play a critical role in our physical, mental, spiritual, and social health, and enrich our lives through connection with cultural heritage and a sense of place. They also generate valuable economic well-being through income and jobs. By experiencing, understanding, and benefiting from connecting with parks and nature, people then advocate, care for, invest in, and act for the health of the nature. So in 2015, the Victorian government commissioned a study to review the literature in relation to the health benefits of parks and natural spaces. That literature review found, amongst many things, that access to safe, high-quality green spaces benefits individuals across every stage of the life cycle, enhances their physical, mental, social, spiritual, and health and well-being. Things like decreasing blood pressure, decreasing stress hormones, decreasing heart rate, improving our mood, increased cognitive function, that's a useful one, improved quality of life, increases physical recovery, strengthens the immune system, and improves musculoskeletal health. And very recent work also from colleagues in IS Global in Spain have keep finding these results and talking about a prescription of nature for the health and well-being of humans. Increased interest and engagement in environmental stewardship and increased social and community connections are important outcomes that the literature found have been proven. They've also found that environmental deprivation plays a key role in undermining human health. Urban and green space exposure can impact weight status and other measurements of the metabolic system. And adolescents are more likely than any other population group to achieve adequate physical levels if green space is available, such as neighbourhood walkability and safety, key factors in encouraging them to have physical activity. And adults who live closer to parks and green areas are more likely to have a lower basal metabolic index, BMI, than adults who live further away. So they felt this evidence was strong enough to connect parks and health to actually make it a justification to promote and invest in green spaces as health promotion settings. Since the review, the Healthy Parks, Healthy People framework has been launched and directly contribute towards the outcomes of protecting Victoria's Environmental Biodiversity 2030 plans and the Victorian Health and Wellbeing Plan 2019 to 2032, is undermined by a memorandum of health and nature that's been signed by the Ministers of Health and Human Services, the Ministers of Energy, Environment and Climate Change to provide and drive stronger connections between environment and health policy, knowledge and programs. And so it shows how these actions of increasing green spaces and resilient biodiverse ecosystems can be supported by having broader partnerships that want the health benefits from these locations. And that you get that enhanced environmental stewardship, which is something we often are looking for. Okay. There are other examples. I'll just finish with this one because this is such a lovely bush pig by Sylvia Campion. SDG 15 is about life on land, to protect and restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems and have sustainably managed forests. And this story is around the feral animal co-management in Australia's Kakadu National Park, where they worked with the local Jawoyn people with their Indigenous knowledge and their needs, values and requirements to actually improve the management of feral animals, in this case, feral pigs. There were different views around feral pigs. The environmental agencies saw them as pests and causing environmental damage. The Jawoyn people saw that there were negative effects upon their native wildlife and that they dig up yam sites and freshwater habitats of turtles. And there was concern about the spread of weeds because these pigs move through the savannah. There was also local disturbance of local sacred sites near one waterhole, which again was going to cause major problems. But they also saw a utility of feral pigs, a source of food for the Jawoyn people, often linked to social protocols and food sharing. And it was a source of income in pig control jobs and a tourism value. And so a joint decision-making approach and techniques were used to actually look at how to manage the feral pigs in the Kakadu National Park but to do it with Indigenous knowledge, experience, leadership and guidance to make sure that it did no harm, but actually achieved the benefits of also managing feral pigs to manage these ecosystems. There's a whole lot of details about how they did that, how they identified the priority habitat sites to start with, and how they set up governance arrangements. But this One Health approach of valuing everyone's knowledge and expertise and full engagement of all stakeholders and actors in co-design, co-implementation, co-monitoring and evaluation was critical to the success, that transdisciplinary approach. It's ensured that life on the land in Kakadu National Park and the physical, spiritual and economic well-being of the Jawoyn people is appropriate with appropriate levels of culling of feral pigs, a true One Health approach. So there are many examples one could go through, and I'm happy over cocktails or whatever to talk about those. But in finishing, I'd like to say thank you, and I hope you can see that people are probably surprised I didn't talk about a pandemic. And I did have something about antimicrobial resistance, but again, One Health approach is more than that. I hope I've demonstrated. And that it is critical to change the way we think, who we work with, whose knowledge and experience we, we value, and the way we do work, so that we actually can make life better for all creatures, great and small, and the green ones. Thank you.
Maxine, do we have any questions from the floor? Maxine? I have one.
Of course. Sure.
Thank you. So you've given us a lot of great examples of One Health environmentally, internationally, and through Victoria. I was going to ask, how are we tracking with the One Health philosophy in Far North Queensland?
Well, people, I mean, often labels are labels. So people may be doing One Health without actually thinking and calling it One Health. Am I right? So I think some of the things that are happening and looking at the virtuous cycle around sugarcane, prawn production, natural filtration of water, preservation of the reef are a good example of that, and also achieving some of those sustainable development goals, life in water, life on land, economic productivity, which was one of the goals, but also human health and well-being. So it may not be called that, but I think some of the environmental impact statements that are done often need to think about that. I don't think we think about the One Health approach enough when we look at some of the construction, damming, etc., that may be being planned. Needs to have a careful think about the whole system, animals, humans, plants, ecosystems.
Any other questions on the floor? Stephen's floating around with the microphone. So.
Andreas, up that.
Voice is not so strong. So.
No, we've got people on Zoom too.
So thanks very much, Maxine. You mentioned earlier on food safety and food security.
Yeah.
So particularly the issue of food safety, I think that's often not really appreciated or underestimated. We talk about infectious diseases as one thing in the soil, but the food safety is something between. We always think about we have to deliver a lot of different foods and food supply to have food security, but the safety issue when it comes to developing countries, I think, for example, diarrhea is one of the major problems in developing countries. And food safety is one of them. The issues regarding pathogens and other kind of contaminants in the food.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I didn't read out all the elements of that note of the no hunger, but it does talk about food security. It does talk about food safety in there. And again, none of these, there's also a water and sanitation goal as well. These things are all interrelated, but food safety is a critical element, you're right. and is mentioned in the goals. In communities that I work in the Greater Mekong, they don't call it the One Health approach, but they're talking about those issues about, you know, where our animals live, where they go for water, where we can prepare our food, our access to being able to make it safe. They're talking about a One Health approach without calling it that, but they see those interlinkages. It's often us who come in and help work with them, all the guidelines, etc., we provide that don't take into account those community needs and voices, but also the knowledge and experience that they have in their everyday lives.
And that's absolutely true. It's just when it comes to actually research in Australia, in America, in the EU, the food safety aspects is always something which is, I think, a little bit diminished. And I don't see often really the angle of food safety. It's a food security, food development, zero hunger makes a lot of food, but not necessarily looking at the food quality of production.
No, the zero hunger goal does have that there, because it's like, we don't want universal access to bad healthcare. We don't want universal access to bad food to get rid of hunger. Yes,
Sure.
Absolutely.
Well,
Now they're
question
warming
over
up.
here.
In the back first. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, Maxine. I'm a master's student, and in this room we have medical, human health, we have animal health, we have environmental health. What would your advice be on how we collaborate with each other? How do we get each other working together to actually come together for One Health?
Well, have the desire to do so is a great place to start. I mean, one of the reasons I came to JCU was because we're a reasonably smaller place and have closer connection to community. We've got all the opportunities to actually demonstrate how to do this in our work, in our research, and in our teaching. One of the barriers that's often there is systems barriers. And so it's identifying those system barriers that are stopping some of those things happening. One of the younger people here who's doing research on One Health, that's what she found about what's stopping doctors and vets from actually thinking about doing a One Health approach is the financing systems, is the poor workload, that it's maybe not in their KPIs. So often there's really silly things that get in the way of these good ideas. The second thing is what I always do is try to get people to understand each other's language, because what we may call health of animals may mean many different things than health of humans or health of the ecosystem. So if we want to work together, we actually have to understand each other, the language we use. They may not use the same language as us about some of these things. We had a discussion the other day. We're doing a block course at the moment around vulnerability and risks. And they're not necessarily concepts that are used in animal health or ecosystem health. But when we asked people to describe what that was, it is what we in human health epidemiologically talk about vulnerability and risks. So we have to actually start that conversation and have that joint vision, and then it can happen. And the systems barriers then become a bit of a nuisance. You may need to navigate around them, but you've got to get started. As they say, that quote, who I always forget who it comes from, keep doing the same things, you get the same results. And we know that's not good enough anymore. We're not going to reach those sustainable development goals. Not just because of COVID, which did cause downturns in many, but we just don't have that political, that professional engagement and commitment, and often system barriers that stop us from actually achieving those.
I have a question from online. So one of our online participants says, what are the digital health implications for One Health?
Very interesting. The easiest example maybe to start with is thinking about digital health to support information systems and trying to get that word interoperability, or at least sharing of data from ecosystems, meteorology, health, human health, animal health, putting them all together. The example I couldn't show you is around the Canadian antimicrobial resistance surveillance system that's been going since 2012 earlier. And they actually get information from a whole range. They get it from animal production, from abattoirs, from sewerage, from aged care homes. The veterinary animal providers provide their data. They use consumption data of antibiotics in animal, human, and plant agriculture. So all of that data is brought together and they use it, because it's not just bringing it together, it's actually using it and responding. And they share it with the community, the stakeholders, to actually see what's happening and what their responses are. So that digital health part is probably part of it. Sharing resources is the important part. In many settings, including remote and rural Australia, there may be some of these digital resources available for one sector that could actually be made available for other sectors to utilise. Sometimes we saw that in COVID-19, but our memories are pretty quick to disappear about sharing of resources, which we did in COVID-19, which we could still do. Some of the analysis of things, particularly maybe looking for these trends and modelling some of those relationships, this is quite a dynamic place, could actually also use digital technologies, machine learning, to actually help us see the problem, maybe help us identify where solutions may be. But again, we've got to use that data as a tool to take action.
Thank you. From the floor.
Thank you so much, Maxine, for the presentation. So one thing I've always wondered as a young person, when I look at, a lot of the things going on these days is, where do we start? And as a medical student, I'm in the wards, I see a lot of different conditions every day. I talk to quite a few different people and, I feel like, workload and there's a lot of, as you said, systemic barriers to incorporating One Health approaches. For instance, I've talked to doctors who've said that it's just impossible with the workload. Vets who said, insurance issues, time, money, remuneration are always issues. And, where do we start when there are so many other issues at play? And, where do we start as a young person? I'm 21 and I really want to know where to go.
So, the secret to life? No. Start. Just start. I mean, all of these things, I'm just learning every day. Got into soil health. I was telling people the other, I love soil health. Fungus, I love learning about fungus. You just start somewhere, just even the reading, starting to open your minds to thinking about different solutions, thinking about where those opportunities may be in the work you have now and the workload you've got. So just people starting to think about these things and have these conversations is a good start to have. There are barriers even in the way we educate, coming back to your question too, at undergraduate level. There should be a lot more places, not necessarily only formal curriculum, but a lot more places where we have opportunities to learn in a different way from the way we were taught. We need that different thinking. And young people, we know, will take more risks, are more creative. As we get older, we get a bit set in our ways. We need that youth to come in and help us finding and activating these systems. It's critical to do so.
Thank you.
So I have another question from online now. So this question relates to how the One Health approach can best be implemented to prevent dengue and other arboviruses in GMS. I'm not sure what GMS
Greater
is.
Mekong Subregion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in Pacific Island countries.
Okay, just again, a small one. Maru, what do you reckon? Dengue loves human spaces. The virus, the mosquitoes, Aedes albopictus and Aedes aegypti. Human environments, the ones we create, are some of the problems that are causing the spread of dengue. And so trying to find ways that we work more in harmony with nature. The biggest problem that we see when we're in Pacific countries are the tyres, the plastic water bottles, all these little receptacles that collect water, and these mosquitoes are just really happy in those environments. So often the policy issues there are not around vector control and trying to have indoor residual spraying, but maybe how do we work with waste management people? How do we work with communities, women's groups? How do we try to get solutions about how to manage this waste, minimize this waste? Some of the work we're doing in Samoa, the Association of Recycle Samoa, are part of the planning group to look at how to reduce the threat of dengue in our settings. Working with the animal laboratories, often they are very good with entomology. They're more likely for biosecurity to have entomological capacity than often the human health sector. And so we've been talking with them about, can you actually work with us to actually provide that entomological expertise and measuring resistance, because they use the same pesticides that we need to use for human health. And the third thing we've been working quite a lot with are people who are the private sector pest control people. So again, the One Health approach is trying to look at all those different partners. In this case, it may not be something that's spread, it's not zoonotic, but it definitely has many aspects across many different sectors and that are needed for the solution. And also you'll get benefits of improved ecosystems and eco-health if you actually address some of those drivers of the mosquitoes breeding.
Do we have any more questions from the floor? One at the back there.
You'll need a microphone.
Microphone's on its way.
I got really loud.
No, Zoom can't hear you. Sorry, Ming. I've been on the other end a lot. You do need microphones.
I'm just thinking that just when you talk about intervention, you started early. So should we, what's the current efforts in preparing different type of workforce that can work together, have that understanding? So that means that we will remove the silo barrier between different sectors right at the beginning. So what's the current efforts and what can education system do in encouraging that understanding early on?
Well, good. Another simple question. In every country, in many regions, Australia is not included in any of these at the moment. There are One Health university networks. Southeast Asia, there's a One Health university network, which has veterinary, nutrition, ecology, public health people. Those groups, as well as their students, engaged in One Health activities, One Health education. And Africa, there's a whole African One Health university network. And the African One Health university network have actually designed One Health competencies that they feel should be addressed by all students who are being trained in any of all of these sectors. So that's there. We really haven't started picking this up. There's been initial discussions in Australia about trying to do that, but it's probably those barriers like workload, KPIs, metrics that have stopped people from having the time to be able to do it. But we've got good models in other countries. And it's only when you get those foundations set up that you can actually, that horrible word pivot, that you can actually then start doing some of these actions once you've built those relationships, those trusts, those networks. And what I was saying earlier, you share some of those visions and knowledge and language together. And not to forget to keep universities linked to communities, because otherwise we are ignoring all that traditional knowledge and experience that is critical for any of these solutions.
Any more questions from the floor? We don't have any more online.
Yeah, Robert. So this is part of your NCD program today, Tegan.
Next question will be back over there.
Murphy's Law.
Thanks, Maxine. Lovely presentation. Just a quick one. Perhaps maybe seeking more of a comment than a question. Circling back to the Sustainable Development Goals
Mm.
and the intersection of that with geopolitics, particularly in the face of rising authoritarianism, dictatorships around the world, whether you could comment more closely on that.
Gee, Wes, you're really making me earn this trip up here, aren't you? Yeah, I mean, aspirational to start with. Those goals were aspirational. And I mean, they're absolutely right. No sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. So a bit of a chicken and egg type situation, really. It is a concern that particularly as you're getting a lot more people feeling threatened, and I mean that also psychologically or socially, they often start going into their comfort areas and trying to talk about having a different way of thinking about things, empathy for others, etc., is starting to get more difficult in many settings. The anti-science, anti-evidence that we're seeing in many locations is a critical problem for trying to work around these things. Concerns about the outsiders, the different, are creating barriers to many of these things. And these are all undermining the ability to actually achieve these sustainable development goals. I do a lot of work now at the community systems level. And that's where I think, you know, step by step, as they say in Vietnam, working with communities and helping them achieve these things, and then slowly building it up and doing what you can do whilst these big geopolitical things are there. None of us in this room, I presume, can address those, prevent those geopolitical things or have the solution to them. But we can keep going on at community level to help people aspire to what they can. I'm working, you know, in the civil society platform. We have civil society groups that are in Myanmar, and they have continued to provide services despite the risks to themselves, despite COVID-19, despite all the problems. They are the primary provider of any health service and health education in their local communities. So I think sometimes we have to, you know, think local, maybe stay local while these global things are happening. But again, if you start addressing people's basic needs, some of these geopolitical things are because people are not having the life that they wish to have. There's growing inequities. And so trying to help find ways of thinking differently to address those things will contribute towards starting to address some of these problems. But not the only answer. But the SDGs, we don't think we'll reach them by 2030. And of course, post-COVID and now with all these geopolitical things, very few people are actually talking about SDGs. Most countries, although the UN asks them to monitor them, are not actually actively reporting progress against them. So there is a concern that we may have made achievements with the Millennium Development Goals, but the world has changed so much now that we may need to go back again, start small, to start trying to get these aspirations, which I don't think any of you in this room would disagree are good aspirations, but we may need to start changing track again. That'd be my personal opinion. Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Maybe one from over here. They can be smaller scale too. Don't be shy. Anyone else? No, we're not giving Tegan any more exercise now. So with questions coming to a close, I'd like to thank you once again, Maxine, for such an insightful and informative presentation. And I have here a small token of our appreciation for your agreeing to come and do the oration today. And I ask you again to join with me in thanking Maxine for her presentation.
I'll open it later if you want to see me come down and talk. Plenty of things to talk about.
And thank you too, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here tonight to carry on the at the work, the story of One Health that Rick Speare championed and Maxine's carrying forward. And thank you to everyone who joined us online. We really appreciate your time tonight. And with that, I think we draw to a close. Thank you very much.